My son-in-law introduced me to the Chief Justice of Ontario as Adele's father. He fixes furnaces. He said it with a smile. The kind of smile that's really a dismissal, dressed up in good manners. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that for 31 years I had been a senior intelligence analyst with CSIS, Canada's Security Intelligence Service. 3 months after that dinner party, the deputy director of CSIS called his office directly, not to congratulate him, to discuss the national security file his law firm had just taken on, and to confirm that the retired furnace repairman he'd been mocking was the analyst who'd originally classified it. His name is Gavin. He married my daughter Adele 6 years ago, and I've spent most of those 6 years watching him decide, quietly and consistently, that I am not worth his full attention. I don't say that with bitterness. I'm 67 years old. I've spent more time in windowless rooms reading intercepts than I have at family dinners, and I've made peace with what that cost me. But I notice things. 31 years of reading between the lines will do that to you. And what I noticed about Gavin, from the very first Thanksgiving he came to our house in Kingston, was that he sorted people. Quickly, instinctively, the way some men sort their mail, important, unimportant, discard. He sorted me into the third pile. The first time I really felt it was that Thanksgiving. Adele brought him home, and he was charming in the way that young Bay Street lawyers are charming, confident, well-dressed, asking the right questions about the right things. He asked my wife Marguerite about her work at Queen's University. He asked Adele's brother about his residency program. He shook my hand and said, "And what did you do before you retired, sir?" And when I told him I'd worked in federal government, he nodded the way you nod when someone tells you they used to manage a parking garage. Pleasant, thorough, done. I had retired 2 years earlier with a classification level most Canadians don't know exists. But that's not something you put on a name tag. After dinner, I was washing dishes when I heard him tell Adele's brother, quietly, in the hallway, "Your dad seems like a real salt-of-the-earth type. Good man. Salt of the earth." The phrase you use for someone you've already decided has a ceiling. Marguerite heard it too. She found me in the kitchen and put her hand on my arm without saying anything. She's done that for 34 years. It means, not yet. The second incident was at Gavin's firm dinner the following spring. His firm, Callaway, Marsh & Reed, one of those Toronto firms with marble floors and a client list that reads like a who's who of Bay Street, was hosting a reception at the Royal Ontario Museum after hours. Adele had wanted me to come. I wore the suit I'd worn to a briefing at Langevin Block in 2009, which still fit because I've never been a man who eats his feelings. Gavin introduced me to his senior partner, a man named Hugh, as my father-in-law from Kingston. Not by name, not with any context, just father-in-law Kingston implied category. Hugh was polite. "What field were you in?" "Federal intelligence," I said. Hugh's eyebrows went up slightly. Gavin laughed, a short, comfortable laugh. "He means the civil service. You know how broad that term gets." He steered Hugh toward the bar. Over his shoulder, Dad worked with the government for years. Good pension, I imagined. Adele appeared at my side. Her face was careful. "He doesn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said. And I did know. That was almost the worst part. He didn't mean anything by it. I simply wasn't worth the energy of a real assumption. What Gavin didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone outside of Marguerite and a handful of people with the appropriate clearance, was that I had spent the last decade of my career as a senior analyst in CSIS's counterterrorism and counterintelligence branch. I had briefed 3 prime ministers. I'd co-authored the intelligence assessments used to shape 2 major pieces of national security legislation. In 2014, I had led the team that identified a foreign interference network operating inside 3 Canadian universities. The investigation ran for 4 years and resulted in 9 individuals being quietly removed from the country without a single press release. I chose to retire early because the work had gotten heavier, and I was tired of carrying it alone in rooms full of people who couldn't know what I carried. I came back to Kingston. I took up woodworking. I fixed our furnace when it went in 2021 because a new one would have cost $4,000. And I had the parts and a YouTube video. And an afternoon, Gavin had visited that weekend and walked past me in the basement without asking what I was doing. When the heat came back on an hour later, he said, "Oh, you actually fixed it?" Like he was surprised the dog had learned a new trick. "I've fixed harder things," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. The third incident, the one that changed everything, happened 8 weeks before the dinner where it all came apart. Gavin's firm had taken on a new client, a foreign-linked holding company with substantial real estate interests in Ontario, and a history that, to anyone who knew what to look for, had some very interesting threads running through it. I knew what to look for. I had retired, not gone blind. I saw the client's name mentioned in a Globe and Mail piece about foreign capital in the Canadian housing market, and I recognized it the way you recognize a face you've seen in a surveillance photograph. I said nothing. It wasn't my file anymore. I wasn't read in, and frankly, it wasn't my place. But 3 weeks later, Gavin was at our house for Sunday dinner, and he was in a good mood. The expansive, self-congratulatory good mood of a man who believes he has just done something significant. The firm had landed a major retainer. International client. Substantial. He was being modest about it in the way people are modest when they want you to ask for details. I asked which sector. He told me. Real estate holding company, international interests, very well capitalized. I put down my fork. "What's the name of the entity?" he told me. I was quiet for a moment. Marguerite, across the table, set down her wineglass very carefully. "You've done your conflict checks?" I asked. Gavin looked at me with the patient expression of a man explaining something to someone who doesn't quite follow. "Dad, I appreciate the interest, but securities and corporate law is a little different from whatever the government had you doing." "I'm sure it is," I said. "The compliance process at our firm is extremely rigorous. We have a full team. I don't doubt it." "So," he smiled, "probably not the kind of thing to worry about at Sunday dinner." I looked at him for a long moment. Marguerite was looking at me. I picked up my fork. "You're right," I said. "Good that the firm has a full team." 2 weeks later, I made one phone call. Not to interfere, not to cause trouble, just to flag, through the appropriate channel, to someone I'd worked with for 12 years, that a name I recognized had surfaced in a context that seemed worth noting. I was careful and specific, and I made clear I had no current access and no interest in re-involving myself. I was just passing along an observation from a retired analyst who still read the papers. Then I forgot about it. Or tried to. The dinner was Gavin's idea. He wanted to celebrate. He'd just been named a partner, the youngest equity partner in Callaway. Marsh and Reed's history, he told us, which may have been true, though Gavin has always had a careful relationship with superlatives. He booked a private room at Canoe on the 54th floor of the TD Tower in Toronto. 34 guests. Adele had told me the reservation alone was $1,000 before food and wine. I contributed what I could. A bottle of tossed Pinot Noir from the Niagara Peninsula, $42 at the LCBO, which is a perfectly good bottle of wine, but not the kind of thing you bring to Canoe. Gavin had glanced at it when I handed it to the sommelier and said with great warmth, "Wonderful, thank you, Dad," the same tone he used when a junior associate handed him something slightly below par. I sat at the family end of the table, next to Marguerite and across from Adele's brother Theo, my son, who had driven up from Kingston with his wife and was already on his second glass of Burgundy and looking like a man counting the minutes until he could leave. Theo has never liked Gavin. He's been polite about it for 6 years, which is more than I would have managed. The room was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling glass, the whole city spread out below us. October, so the sun was setting early. That particular Toronto October light that turns everything amber for about 20 minutes and then gives up. The other guests were mostly Gavin's colleagues and their partners, with a few of Adele's friends mixed in. 3 senior partners from the firm, 2 circuit court judges I recognized from the Ontario Superior Court, a retired deputy minister I had met once, years ago, at a security briefing in Ottawa. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a fractional nod. I gave him one back. Neither of us moved toward the other. Old habit. Gavin made a point of circulating, bringing people to the table's center where he was holding court. He introduced me twice, once to a judge as Adele's father, retired civil servant, good man, and once to the managing partner of the firm, a very tall woman named Fiona, as my father-in-law from Kingston. He's the one who actually knows how a furnace works. Light laughter. Fiona smiled at me. I smiled back. I am 67 years old. I have been in rooms where the stakes were considerably higher than a partnership dinner, and I have learned that the best thing a person can do in most situations is nothing. So I ate my halibut and drank my wine and watched the city go amber and then dark outside the windows, and I waited. Toasts began around 9. Hugh, the senior partner, spoke first, measured, funny in a Bay Street way, complimenting Gavin's billing hours and his instinct for the complex file. One of the judges said something about the future of the Ontario bar. Adele spoke beautifully, the way she always does, with real feeling and no notes. Then Gavin stood up. He thanked everyone. He talked about the firm, about his mentors, about the kind of lawyer he hoped to be. He talked about Adele with genuine warmth. Whatever else he is, he does love her. I've never doubted that. And then he turned slightly in my direction, and I felt the room shift the way a room shifts when someone is about to be made into a point. I also want to acknowledge the family who supported us, he said. Adele's family has been wonderful. Her brother, a physician, who understands the demands of a profession that never really stops. Theo raised his glass, looking pained, and her father. Gavin smiled at me, the full wattage of his Bay Street warmth, who I think represents a certain honest, unpretentious quality that's easy to lose sight of in rooms like this one. A man who spent his career in the civil service, who came home and fixed things with his hands, who brought a very nice Niagara Pinot tonight, laughter around the table, and who reminds me that not everything valuable comes with a title or a corner office. He raised his glass to me, to the kind of quiet life well lived. The table raised their glasses. I looked at him steadily. He was smiling, pleased with himself. He thought he was being generous. He had made me a symbol of humble virtue, which is a way of making someone small and calling it a compliment. I raised my glass and said, "Thank you, Gavin." And then I set it down and said, "May I say something?" The room went quiet in the way rooms do when they sense that the next 30 seconds might be worth remembering. "Of course," Gavin said, still smiling. I stood up slowly. I've never been a tall man, but I've learned to take up the right amount of space. "I want to congratulate my son-in-law," I said, "genuinely. Making equity partner at his age at a firm like this one is a real achievement, and I don't say that lightly." I paused. "I also want to say that Gavin is right. I did have a quiet career, federal government, 31 years. I rarely talked about it, even at home. Classification reasons mostly. The kind of work that isn't meant to be discussed over dinner." I looked at the retired deputy minister across the room. He had gone very still. "But I'll say this much," I continued. "The file your firm took on last month, the one with the International Holding Company, the one Gavin mentioned at Sunday dinner, I recognized that name. I recognized it because I spent 8 years tracking the network it belongs to, not the Canadian side. The other side." I let that sit for a moment. I made one phone call after that dinner, just to flag the connection to someone who's still in a position to look at it. The room was very quiet now. Gavin's smile had not moved, but it had changed. It was the same arrangement of facial muscles performing a function it no longer felt. 3 weeks ago, I said, the deputy director of CSIS called my daughter's home. She told me afterward. I looked at Adele. She was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. He wanted to speak with Gavin about the firm's client intake process. Apparently the call was, I believe the word Adele used was thorough. Gavin set down his wine glass. I'm not raising this to embarrass anyone, I said. I'm raising it because my son-in-law made a toast about quiet lives and unpretentious values, and I think he deserves to know that sometimes the quietest people in the room had been the ones doing the most complicated work. Not for recognition, not for corner offices, because it needed doing. I looked at him. I cut wood in my garage, and I fix furnaces, and I bring $40 Pinot to fancy restaurants, and I would do all of it again. Every bit of it. Because that's what retirement from a life like mine looks like when you do it right. Quiet. Unremarkable. Ordinary on the outside. I paused. The work was anything but. I raised my glass. To Gavin's partnership. He's earned it. I hope the firm's compliance team is as rigorous as he says. I sat down. The room remained quiet for what felt like a long time. Then the retired deputy minister from across the table raised his glass and said quietly, "Here, here." The circuit court judge beside him did the same. And then Fiona, the managing partner, whose expression had shifted from polite attention to something considerably more alert. Gavin didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Or rather, he spoke. He finished the night with the professional grace of a man whose livelihood depends on maintaining composure. But he said nothing to me. Not that night. The morning after, I was back in Kingston. I was in the garage, sanding the edges of a blanket chest I'd been building for Adele's birthday, when my phone rang. It was a number I recognized from the old days. A CSIS main exchange, filtered through a relay. I hadn't seen it on my phone in 3 years. I answered. It was someone I'd worked with in the counterintelligence branch, a woman I'd mentored for 6 years before I retired. She confirmed what I had already pieced together. The flag I'd raised had opened something, not because of my call alone. There had been other threads. But my call had provided a specific operational context that helped connect what had previously been separate files. The firm had been contacted. The client had been dropped. There would be no press release. There never was. The deputy director wanted me to pass along his regards, she said. He said to tell you your eye is still good. I thanked her and went back to sanding. Adele called that afternoon. She'd been thinking since the dinner, she said. She'd been thinking for a while, actually. 3 years if she was being honest. She loved Gavin, she was clear about that, and I believed her. But something had shifted. Not because of the dinner, because of everything the dinner had finally made visible. "Dad," she said, "why didn't you ever tell us? Any of it, all those years?" "Because it wasn't mine to tell," I said, "and because the work wasn't about being known for it. It was about it getting done." She was quiet for a moment. "Gavin said this morning that you ambushed him. He introduced me to a federal judge as a furnace repairman." "I know. I've been at this for 6 years, Adele." "I know," she said again, and there was something in her voice I recognized. Not just the acknowledgement of a fact, but the acknowledgement of a failure. Hers as much as his. She had let it go on. She had smoothed things over and absorbed the discomfort because it was easier than addressing it, and she was too honest with herself not to know that. "I don't want you to divorce him on my account," I said. "That's not why I said what I said." "I know that too." She paused. "He asked me last night if I thought you had actually worked in intelligence, or if it was, he used the phrase, a civil service exaggeration." I said nothing. "I showed him your CSIS service medal," she said, "the one you keep in the box in the closet." I showed him the citation. You didn't have to do that. I know. I wanted to. Another long silence. He's going to want to apologize, she said. He's already composing it in his head, I can tell. Something that frames this as a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. He understood me perfectly. He just decided I didn't matter. Adele didn't answer that. She didn't need to. What happened after was quieter than people might expect. There was no dramatic scene. Gavin did not arrive at our door with flowers and a prepared speech, though I believe he wanted to. What he did was call me 4 days later and talk for 11 minutes without quite apologizing. He said he hadn't known. He said he wished he had. He said he had enormous respect for what I described, and he hoped I understood that his comments had always been made with genuine warmth. I told him I understood what his comments had been made with. I told him I didn't hold grudges. Both of those things were true. What I didn't tell him was that the 11-minute call was enough for me to understand exactly what kind of man he was and exactly what kind of man he was always going to be. Some people, when they learn they've been wrong, recalibrate. They sit with the discomfort of having misjudged someone, and they let it change them, a little, in the direction of humility. Gavin recalibrated toward strategy. He needed me to be mollified. He needed the disruption resolved. He was very good at it. He is, I will say, an exceptionally skilled lawyer. The firm's relationship with the international client was quietly concluded. There was a brief, careful internal review, the kind that produces no documents anyone wants to keep. Fiona sent me a handwritten note about 3 weeks after the dinner. It said, "Mr. Brennan, we appreciated your perspective. The firm values knowing who its friends are. Clean and precise, and saying everything it needed to say, without saying anything that could be repeated." I put it in the box in the closet, next to the service medal. Adele and Gavin are still together. I want to be clear about that, because I am not in the business of destroying my daughter's marriage, and what happens between them is theirs to navigate. But something has shifted in how she sees him, a small but permanent adjustment in her view of the distance between who he presents himself to be and who he is at the level below presentation. She has not told me this. I have inferred it from the way she calls more often and the things she says when she does. Marguerite and I drove up to Toronto in November to see them. Gavin met me at the door, took my coat, asked how the drive had been. Over dinner, he asked about my work. He called it your career, which is something he had never done before. He asked careful, appropriate questions. He did not stumble once. He was very, very good at it. I'll give him that. After dinner, while Adele and Marguerite were in the kitchen, he poured me a scotch and sat across from me in the living room and said, "I want to say again, for what it's worth, I genuinely didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "I hope we're okay." I looked at him. 67 years old, 31 years of reading people in rooms where reading them wrong had consequences. I looked at my son-in-law and I saw a man who had learned to be careful, which is not the same thing as having learned anything. "We're fine, Gavin," I said. He nodded, relieved. I drank my scotch and looked out the window at the November street, and I thought about the work, the real work, the 31 years of it, the early mornings and the late nights and the things I'd seen that I'd spent 20 years learning not to dream about. And I thought about Kingston and the garage and the blanket chest I'd finished for Adele, sanded smooth and fitted with hand-cut dovetails, the kind of joints that hold without any hardware because the geometry is right. Some things hold because they're made right. Some things hold because they have to. The difference matters, even when it doesn't show. I finished my scotch. Adele called us in for dessert. I went.